Hello lovelies, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about Ginny and Georgia season 2, which I might be as bold to say that I actually really liked it. I know that when I saw the show came out on Netflix, I was fully prepared to hate on it for the next 8 hours, but surprisingly, after I think episode 4, I really started to like the show a lot. I'll admit, this is a new technique that we don't see often, that the first season is so unbelievably bad and gets so much criticism that you then renew the show and actually improve it for the following season. But here we are. As a quick recap, Georgia the mom, Ginny the teenager, it's kind of more about their relationship with one another. In the show, there's obviously other characters, but I think at the forefront, both of those are the two main characters. And Georgia, she goes through a series of hardships and tries to fix all of the problems, and Ginny has a problem with how she solves those issues, and she's also a teenager, and so that's a factor as well. But by far, the main premise is Ginny and Georgia's relationship. I think a lot of people's issues with season 1 was that they really hated Ginny as a character. Sure, Georgia killed a man, but because he was trying to sexually abuse her daughter, you just really didn't understand why Ginny was so mad at her mom. It seemed almost ungrateful. And so I think that was the biggest issue, is that you were rooting for Georgia, and yet the show wanted you rooting for Ginny, I think, a little bit. They wanted you to think that Georgia was erratic, and it just didn't come off that way. Anyways, the show starts in season 2 with the same old, same old. Ginny hates her mom because her mom tried to get her out of a situation of sexual abuse. I have a hard time having a problem with this, having an issue with this whatsoever, and so I almost quit the show multiple times. I didn't think it was that interesting. Pretty much my notes was, why does she have a problem with her mom, ? And that's kind of where I was at. I think if you're going to make Ginny be the good character and Georgia be more of like the problem character, you have to have the audience understand that Georgia made the wrong choices when raising Ginny. The show actually starts doing this for the first time, I thought, this season, when you hear Zion's mother say that she wanted to give Georgia money and she wanted to be able to make sure that Ginny was going to a good school and help raise her. We can all understand that Georgia didn't want to lose Ginny and was afraid that she was going to be taken, but ultimately I think we can all agree that it would have been better if Ginny had more of a stable household growing up. This situation also was kind of starting to develop with the credit cards. Georgia ruined the credit scores of her children, and if you're in the US, your credit score is pretty much one of the most important things. You can't buy a house, you can't get a credit card, you can't get an apartment. Your credit score pretty much determines if you're going to be able to live somewhere. There was some development that Georgia was being a bit selfish in the paths and decisions she was making for her family, like there was shown in season 2. In season 1, I think that more people would have understood more where Ginny was coming from. Also, as a teenager, you're lacking a lot of context in the situations, and you just don't have as much life experience, so it makes sense for Ginny to react irrationally mad at certain circumstances. I think what made me start liking the show was when Ginny and Georgia started to act as a team and like each other, actually, for the first time. It felt like a kind of a Bonnie and Clyde scenario. Personally, I think it's refreshing to see that teenagers and their parents actually getting along for once, especially a mother-daughter duo. Breaking down the characters and the character development that I liked, let's start with Ginny. I think she became a lot better character, obviously. She starts to actually articulate her issues and her problems instead of bottling them up inside. And although a lot of us do bottle up our emotions inside, almost was getting to a point as there's no growth, there's no development. I get it. You have issues and you're just not going to tell anyone. Where do we go from here? Finally, we see in this show that Ginny is starting to trust people, whether it's Marcus, Zion, or Georgia, but she's starting to talk about her issues for the first time. I also like that Ginny starts to stand up for her mom, it feels like, for the first time. So whether it's to the PI, or whether it's encouraging her mom to improve her life as well. I personally want Georgia and Ginny to succeed. I want them to be the best versions of themselves, and when you see each other encourage one another to be that, it's definitely a show that I would much rather want to watch. For Georgia, like I said before, I think that they finally started showing about how Georgia didn't always make the right decisions when growing Ginny, which kind of recovered Ginny's character arc a little bit, in my opinion. For example, we saw that Ginny was being rude to her mom, and so her mom decided to say, hey, you know what, Paul's moving in here. And so that wasn't delivered in a delicate way that would have respected her children's emotions. And so we saw how Georgia kind of acted like a child there. And we also saw that when Georgia's mad at Ginny's teacher, she was going to plant like a nudie magazine in her teacher's drawer to get her teacher in trouble instead of addressing it with the principal. Instead, she just acted without thinking. And I think this makes sense why Ginny would be frustrated with her mom. Even the show confronts Georgia about why she's always running from problems instead of ever thinking about different solutions. This situation especially comes up when we see that Ginny's encouraging Georgia to tell Paul about her criminal background, because instead of running away and fleeing like they usually do, maybe Paul could help them. I also think it was good character development that Georgia could finally trust someone enough to actually let them take care of her and her family, and it being the right decision, even though it was scary to do in the first place. The one thing I don't understand though, I don't understand why Georgia killed Cynthia's husband. I think a lot of people are confused about that. Personally, I don't think the show did enough to create Cynthia and Georgia's relationship. It still felt like they were on pretty rocky territory. And before, every single one of Georgia's murders seemed to be something that was like more of like a crime of passion and felt like she had no other way out. And this one, Cynthia's husband wasn't really impacting her, and it wasn't like Georgia actually was in that same situation where she had someone that like wouldn't give up and die. Like, empathizing with the situation didn't warrant murder. I also feel like Georgia's murders have been very smart in the past. I mean, she poisoned her husband to make it look like a heart attack. So her just suffocating someone and leaving her fingerprints all over the scene really doesn't seem in par with how Georgia's actions have been done in the past. Next, I think that Zion's been a really great character, and I loved having him in the show. I also loved that he's not there just to create drama and issues in Georgia and Ginny's life, but instead actually improve it. I think Zion's character just brings a lot of peace and stability to the show. I kind of thought, as a parent, I would be mad at Zion for not telling me if my daughter was self-harming, but I think that's kind of more into Zion's character. He is pushed around a lot by Ginny and Georgia, and it kind of shows of how he might have been pushed out of Ginny's life a lot more when it came to Georgia. I also appreciated Zion's conversations with Ginny when it came to race, of letting Ginny kind of more explore about what to do instead. I think I would have liked it better if when Ginny was told that she had to choose a book for the class to read, if Ginny was excited and then she like went and told Zion, being like, look, I get to choose a book for everyone to have to read for the class, and then I have to teach a lesson. And then instead Zion goes, well, this could be an issue, like you make your decision, but do you realize that you're teaching the class and not your teacher? Like, that would have developed the conversation a little bit more. I think a decent amount of people could argue, well, shouldn't Ginny be the one teaching instead of a white man talking about race, etc.? And so you could have gone into it more of saying, like, as a white person, you can still talk about the context of a black author. I think it's ridiculous for us to, like, if I was reading a book about sexism, that it would have to be a woman teacher that teaches me instead of a male teacher. Like, let's use Florida the Flies, for example. Somehow teachers were able to talk about savagery and kids living on an island in the middle of nowhere without having lived on an island in the middle of nowhere themselves. Like, there's the ability to talk about books and what their themes are without being in that situation at some time yourself. I think that's a problem sometimes with identity things, is that people think that they have to have like lived the experience. Like, I can read a book about someone being depressed and talking about how hard depression is and be able to almost empathize a lot more with that situation without myself personally having depression. I also think a problem is when you have Ginny running the conversation with a room of white teenagers, it's probably going to stop more conversation, because a lot of people are going to be like, oh, whatever Ginny's saying is right because it's her lived experience, instead of actually being interested and having a conversation about the themes and different levels of the book. So I think that also could have been presented that maybe this was an awkward position to be putting the other students in as well, and that even though Ginny could have added context, it didn't just have to be that Ginny is telling people her experience. That being said, I think it was a great example of talking about race and racism in a show. I think too many times when we see shows, we see someone being like, well, I hate blah, blah, blah. And so that's why I'm going to treat this person awfully. I don't think that happens that much in typical public situations. But I think for the most part, when we see racial things, it is things like this. More of singling people out, making people feel uncomfortable, that people can get away with by saying that they're trying to be inclusive. So I think it was a good example for when you're talking about racism nowadays. I also have liked Marcus a lot more this season as well. Maybe it's because they're in an actual relationship and it isn't Ginny cheating on her boyfriend, which I do not see as being passionate. I see Ginny being an awful person. So it's nice seeing their relationship together. Marcus being trusted so much by Ginny, I think it was good for how his character was portrayed, because he's probably the only character in the show that would make sense that Ginny could say things like she's harming herself or that her mom killed someone, and he wouldn't immediately go and tell someone. I also think that they portrayed Marcus's depression really well. Just as someone who's been around people with depression in the past, a lot of it is like pushing every single person away from you that could help you, because you're afraid you're going to taint them or make their lives worse. And I think that's a big thing. Like, depression isn't just like not talking to someone, it's actively pushing away people that are close to you. And the show did a good job at, Marcus is dealing with depression, and Ginny had no idea. And so when he calls her out on it, I think Ginny starts to realize that maybe she's a little bit like her mom in being more self-absorbed and self-assessed. As for the friend group, I think everyone can agree that Max was just a complete psycho this season. I hated every time she was on the show. Even when they made up and that Ginny became friends again with Max, she was still an annoying character. I'm gonna be honest, I could care less about her relationship with Sophie or Sylphie. If you're gonna dive into the character, dive more into Max's relationship with Marcus, because at least we have some idea who Marcus is. A Sophie character I just could care less about, because I don't really know anything about her. As for Nora, I just feel like she doesn't really have an opinion. I thought they were going to hint that she was going to break up with her boyfriend when she was talking about how unromantic he is. Nora just seems like a very boring character, and so I don't really understand, like, if you're not going to give her screen time, don't have her and Abby reconcile. Like, don't give her any speaking roles if you're gonna have her that boring. I think what I would like more from the friend group is if they instead interacted a lot more with each other individually. I really like Ginny and Abby meeting up and having their own independent conversations. It seems like it pretty much falls apart when Max isn't there. And so I would like to see the characters hang out more one-on-one with each other. Even that all being said, I would love to learn more about Abby. I feel like they've sprinkled so many issues with Abby, but they just haven't completed them. Is someone going to ever address this? The next person I want to talk about is Bracia. I think the character development of Bracia was so good this season. She is such a fun character, and I like that she's no longer just a character put there to be like, hey, I'm the black friend of Ginny. And so I think the show did such a good time. And I also like that it shows that Ginny has more of a relationship with Bracia. I didn't really understand why Bracia was always being so nice to her in season 1, when Ginny just seemed to like always be throwing her off to the side. For all in all, I think that they did a really great job with Bracia this season, because honestly, I probably couldn't have even named her name last season. So I think they did a really good job. Last but not least, we have Paul, and I'm seeing a lot of Paul hate, and I don't understand why. It sounds like the first time that Georgia really met a good guy who has a stable life, wants to get married, wants to have kids, and has money and power. Which, like, we're seeing that this is the ideal man for Georgia, and she's still trying to run away. And so that's clearly a Georgia issue, instead of that it was just the situation she was in and that she was forced to run away. We also saw a lot of times that Georgia was more willing to lie as a knee-jerk reaction to Paul instead of open up and tell the truth. In season 3, we're going to see that Paul is probably going to help Georgia. If it's not for the love, it's for his own political ambitions of being able to save face. And Paul is probably going to have to take care of Ginny and Austin, and probably with Zion, and I hope that they continue to build Paul and Zion's friendship. I think it's showing such a healthy relationship between the two fathers. And a lot of people are like, Paul doesn't have a lot of depth and isn't really interesting. Okay, so he's not supposed to be. He's supposed to highlight Georgia's problems or highlight how Georgia's getting better. Overall, I think Netflix did a great job at fixing an absolute disaster of a show. As long as you keep Georgia and Ginny as a team, as a duo, you're going to continue to have a very good show. Austin might become a serial killer because he saw his mom kill someone and then he shot his dad. So I think that's a possibility. He also stabbed someone in class, forgot about that. Maybe we'll see Simone defend Georgia in court because she's a lawyer, so maybe that'll be a thing, and Zion like asks Simone to defend her. Because remember, she's a defense attorney. She's not just a lawyer, she's a defense attorney. Maybe Paul leaves Georgia after she gets out of jail and then she gets with Joe. I think like them presenting Joe as like some like guy who has like a evil kind of past. Like I think maybe that's why he's more understanding of Georgia's past instead of someone like Paul who's like a goody two-shoes. So we'll see. I definitely will watch season 3. I think the show is a good show now. I think they did a really good job. So thanks for joining. I really appreciated it. Thanks for watching the show. And if there's another show that you want me to watch, happy to watch it. All right, have a good one. Bye.